I never thought I'd be standing in a bank, feeling my knees buckle, the world spinning around me because of coffee. My own husband had been poisoning my trust, my health, my very sense of reality. Today I need to tell you something that nearly cost me everything. If this story touches your heart, would you consider subscribing? These stories need to reach people who might be living through something similar, and your support helps them find their way here. My name is Margaret Foster, and at 67 years old, I thought I knew what love looked like. I lived in a quiet neighborhood on the south side of Chicago, in a brick bungalow that had been our home for 42 years. The house still smelled faintly of the vanilla candles I used to burn before everything changed, before the mornings became something to dread. I wore the same floral house dress most days, the one with the faded blue flowers that Mark said made me look younger. My hands trembled slightly when I held things now, a tremor I'd convinced myself was just age catching up with me. Mark had always been attentive in his own way. He worked in sales for a medical supply company, the kind of job that required charm and persistence. He'd retired 3 years ago, and I thought it would bring us closer. Instead, it brought something else into our home, something dark that wore the mask of devotion. Every morning, like clockwork, he'd appear in our small kitchen with 2 mugs. His was black coffee, strong enough to strip paint. Mine was lighter, with cream, and what he said was a special vitamin supplement his doctor friend had recommended. "It's good for your bones," he'd say, stirring the powder into my mug with careful precision. Dr. Patterson swears by it, says all his older patients take it. He'd watch me take the first sip, his eyes tracking the movement of the cup to my lips, the way a scientist might observe an experiment. At the time, I thought it was sweet, his concern for my health. I thought it meant he cared. The powder dissolved completely, leaving no trace except for a slightly chalky aftertaste that I learned to mask with an extra spoonful of sugar. Mark never commented on the sugar, though he'd spent years criticizing my sweet tooth, warning me about diabetes and weight gain. That should have been my first clue. When someone stops caring about the small things they once policed so carefully, it usually means they're focused on something bigger, something worse. The first time I felt strange after drinking it, I blamed the summer heat. Chicago summers can be brutal, the kind of humid weight that presses down on you like a wet blanket. But it was October when things really started to shift. I'd finish my coffee and feel this fog rolling in, thick and disorienting. My thoughts would scatter like leaves in the wind. Simple tasks became monumental. I'd stand in front of the refrigerator, door open, cold air washing over me, completely forgetting what I'd come for. Sometimes I'd find myself in rooms with no memory of walking there. I'd be standing in the bathroom, toothbrush in hand, staring at my reflection and wondering how I'd gotten there. Or I'd be in the basement, surrounded by boxes of old photographs and Christmas decorations, my fingers trailing over dusty surfaces, my mind blank as freshly fallen snow. The episodes would last for hours. I'd lose entire afternoons to this strange, disconnected feeling, as if I were watching my own life through a fog-covered window. When the clarity would return, usually around dinner time, I'd feel exhausted, wrung out like a dishcloth that had been twisted too hard. My muscles would ache, my eyes would burn, and I'd have a headache that felt like someone had wrapped a steel band around my skull and was slowly tightening it. Mark would find me like that sometimes. He'd place his hand on my shoulder, gentle but firm, and guide me back to the kitchen table. His voice would be soft, concerned in a way that made my chest tighten with gratitude and shame. "You're having another spell," he'd say, as if this were a documented condition, as if I'd always been this way. I started to believe him. Memory is such a fragile thing, isn't it? When someone you trust tells you your mind is failing, you start to question every thought, every perception. He began keeping a notebook, a small blue spiral-bound thing that he'd pull out whenever I seemed confused. He'd flip through the pages, showing me his handwritten entries. "See? Tuesday, you forgot you'd already had lunch and tried to make a sandwich at 3 in the afternoon. Wednesday, You called me Robert 3 times. That's your father's name, honey. He's been dead for 15 years. He'd say these things gently, sadly, as if it pained him to remind me of my deteriorating mental state. I'd stare at those entries, written in his neat, precise handwriting, and feel a sick sense of dread pooling in my stomach. I couldn't remember any of those incidents, not a single one. It was like reading about a stranger's life, except the stranger was supposed to be me. Our daughter, Jennifer, lived in Boston with her husband and 2 kids. She called every Sunday, but our conversations had become shorter, more strained. Mark would often take the phone from me midway through, explaining that I was tired, that I needed to rest. I'd hear his voice in the other room, low and soothing, telling her that I was having good days and bad days, that she shouldn't worry, but maybe shouldn't visit just yet. The isolation happened so gradually, I didn't even notice the walls closing in. I remember one particular Sunday in late October. Jennifer had called right after church, and I could hear the sounds of her children playing in the background, their high-pitched laughter carrying across the miles. "Mom, you sound different," she said, her voice tight with worry. "Your words are slurring a little. Are you okay?" "I'm fine, sweetheart," I told her. But even to my own ears, my voice sounded strange, thick and slow, like I was speaking through honey. "Just tired. Your father and I went for a long walk this morning." There was a pause, and I could almost hear her thinking, weighing whether to push further. "Dad mentioned you've been having some memory issues. Maybe you should see a doctor, get a checkup." Before I could respond, Mark was there, his hand extended for the phone. I hadn't even heard him come into the room. "Let me talk to her," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. I handed over the phone, feeling a strange mix of relief and resentment. I stayed in my chair at the kitchen table, listening to his end of the conversation. "She's okay, Jenny. I'm taking good care of her. You know how it is with aging. It happens to everyone eventually." A pause. "No, I don't think it's necessary to fly out here. You've got your hands full with the kids. Besides, all the excitement might be too much for your mother right now. She needs calm, routine." Another pause, longer this time. "I promise I'll call you if anything changes. You have my word." When he hung up, he came back to the kitchen and placed the phone on the table in front of me. "She worries too much," he said, running his hand through his thinning gray hair. "I told her you're fine. Just need rest. No point in getting everyone worked up over normal aging, right?" Normal aging. The words felt wrong, like a coat that didn't quite fit, but I couldn't articulate why. I just nodded, too tired to argue, too confused to know what I'd even be arguing about. Then came the text message that changed everything. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late November. The leaves had all fallen from the oak tree in our front yard, leaving bare branches that scratched against the bedroom window at night. I was sitting at the kitchen table, attempting to pay some bills online, when my phone buzzed. It was from the bank, First National on Western Avenue, where we'd held our accounts for 30 years. The message was about unusual account activity, a request for my verbal authorization on a transfer. The amount made my stomach drop. $75,000. I stared at that number until it burned into my vision. We didn't have $75,000 to transfer. Or did we? My mind felt like it was moving through maple syrup, thick and slow. I tried to remember our last bank statement, but the numbers wouldn't come into focus. Mark had been handling most of our finances lately, said it was easier that way, that I shouldn't stress myself with the details. I'd been grateful, I think. Or had I been too foggy to protest? I tried to remember when exactly he'd taken over the bills. It had been gradual, I thought. First, he'd offered to handle the mortgage payment because I'd apparently written the check wrong, making it out for $800 instead of $1,800. I didn't remember making that mistake, but he'd shown me the returned check, my signature scrawled at the bottom, the amount clearly incorrect in my own handwriting. Then it was the utilities, because I'd supposedly forgotten to pay the electric bill for 2 months and we'd received a disconnection notice. Again, I had no memory of this, but Mark had the notice, had shown me the envelope addressed to me, unopened on my desk, where I'd apparently left it. One by one, he'd taken over every aspect of our financial life, and I'd let him because what choice did I have? I couldn't trust my own mind anymore. Better to let him handle things than risk making another mistake, another error that would prove I was losing myself piece by piece. The smell of his aftershave announced his presence before I heard his footsteps. Old Spice, the same brand he'd worn since we met at a church social in 1979. I was 24 then, working as a secretary at an insurance firm, still living with my parents in their apartment near Wrigley Field. He was 27, confident and charming, with dark hair he wore slicked back and a smile that made promises. I'd believed every single one. I remembered that first night so clearly, one of the few memories that remained sharp and intact. He'd approached me during the coffee hour after the service, holding a paper cup of weak church coffee and wearing a navy blue suit that looked expensive. "I've seen you here before," he'd said, his smile confident. "Margaret, right? You always sit 3 pews from the front, left side." I'd been flattered that he'd noticed, that he'd paid attention. "You've been keeping track?" I'd asked, feeling my cheeks warm. "Only of the pretty ones," he'd replied, and I'd laughed, charmed by his boldness, his certainty. He'd asked me to dinner that night, and I'd said yes. 6 months later, he'd proposed. A year after that, we were married in that same church, with those same weak coffee cups at the reception, and I thought I was the luckiest woman alive. 42 years. Where had they gone? And when had the man who'd noticed which pew I sat in become the man who was stealing from me? "What are you doing?" His voice was casual, but I caught something underneath it, a tightness that made me look up. He was standing in the doorway, still wearing his reading glasses, the newspaper folded under his arm. He looked so normal, so utterly ordinary, that for a moment I questioned whether I'd imagined the text entirely. I held up my phone, my hand shaking slightly. The bank sent a message. About a transfer? Something flickered across his face, quick as a striking snake. Then it was gone, replaced by that concerned, patient expression I'd come to know so well. He walked over, set down his newspaper, and gently took the phone from my hand. His fingers were warm, familiar. They'd held mine at our wedding, had steadied me during Jennifer's difficult birth, had wiped away my tears when my mother died. How could hands that had done all those things be doing something else entirely? "Oh, that," he said, his voice light, dismissive. "I told you about this last week, remember? We're moving some funds around for better interest rates. My financial advisor suggested it." He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "You probably forgot. You've been so scattered lately." Had he told me? I tried to reach back into my memory, but it was like grasping at smoke. Everything felt uncertain, fragmented. Maybe he had mentioned it. Maybe I had forgotten. The fog in my head seemed to thicken, and I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me. I gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. "Are you okay?" Mark was beside me now, his hand on my back, rubbing small circles the way you might comfort a child. "You look pale. Did you take your morning vitamins?" "Vitamins. Yes, the vitamins in my coffee." I nodded, not trusting my voice. The room had started to tilt slightly, and I closed my eyes, willing everything to stabilize. "Why don't you go lie down?" he suggested. "I'll handle the bank stuff. That's what I'm here for, isn't it? To take care of you?" I let him guide me to the bedroom, his arm around my waist, supporting me. The bedspread was the same one we'd bought at Marshall Field's 20 years ago, burgundy with gold threads running through it. I'd spent so many hours lying there lately, staring at those threads, trying to make sense of the pattern while my mind drifted in and out of clarity. He helped me onto the bed, adjusted the pillows behind my head with practiced efficiency. When had he become so good at this? When had I become someone who needed this kind of care? "Rest," he said, pulling the curtains closed. The room fell into shadow, and I heard him leave, the door clicking softly shut behind him. I lay there in the darkness, my heart beating too fast, that text message still glowing behind my eyelids. $75,000. Unusual activity. Something was wrong. Something had been wrong for a long time, but every time I tried to grasp it, the thought would slip away like water through my fingers. I must have dozed off, because when I opened my eyes again, the room was completely dark. The digital clock on the nightstand read 8:47 p.m. I'd been asleep for hours. My mouth felt dry, cottony, and my head ached with a dull, persistent throb. I could hear the television downstairs, the murmur of voices from whatever show Mark was watching. I sat up slowly, the room spinning slightly before settling. My purse was on the dresser where I'd left it that morning. Inside was my phone. The bank's text was still there, but there were other messages too now. One from Jennifer, asking if I was feeling all right because Dad had called her concerned. Another from the bank, confirming that the transfer had been completed, thanking me for my verbal authorization. But I hadn't given any authorization. I hadn't spoken to anyone at the bank. The realization cut through the fog like a knife through butter, sharp and sudden and terrifying. My hands were trembling as I opened my banking app. It took 3 tries to enter my password correctly, my fingers clumsy on the screen. When the account finally loaded, I had to blink several times to make sure I was reading the numbers correctly. Our savings account, the one we'd built together over 42 years of marriage, was nearly empty. Where there should have been just over $90,000, there was now barely $15,000. I scrolled through the recent transactions, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Transfer after transfer, each one for thousands of dollars, going back months. How had I not noticed? But I knew the answer. I hadn't been checking the accounts. I'd trusted Mark to handle everything, and more than that, I'd been too foggy, too confused, too scattered to think about money or bills or anything beyond getting through each day. There was a pattern to the transfers. They'd started small, 3,000 here, 5,000 there, back in July. By September, they'd grown larger, 10,000, 15,000, and now 75,000 in a single transaction. All of them going to an account I didn't recognize, a string of numbers that meant nothing to me. I forced myself to stand, to move to the window. Outside, the street was quiet, the occasional car passing with a soft hiss of tires on pavement. The Hendersons' house across the street had their Christmas lights up already, colored bulbs blinking in a cheerful pattern. I'd always loved Christmas, the way our house would smell of pine and cinnamon, how Jennifer would come home and we'd bake cookies together, filling the kitchen with warmth and laughter. But this year felt different. This year felt like something was ending. My reflection in the window glass was ghostly, indistinct. I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. When had I become so thin? My cheekbones jutted out sharply, and my eyes looked hollow, ringed with dark circles. I looked sick. I looked like someone who was fading away, disappearing bit by bit while everyone around her pretended not to notice. No, not pretended. Mark had noticed. Mark had been making it happen. The thought came to me with startling clarity, cutting through the fog that had been my constant companion for months. The vitamins. The special supplement his doctor friend had recommended. Except there was no doctor friend, was there? There never had been. Mark had worked in medical supply sales for 35 years. He had access to all sorts of medications, knew their effects, their side effects, how to use them, how to abuse them. I thought about all the years I'd given to this marriage, to this man downstairs watching television as if nothing were wrong. I'd worked as a secretary for 15 years while he built his career, coming home to cook dinner and keep the house and raise our daughter. When his mother had gotten sick with Alzheimer's, I'd been the one to care for her, feeding her, bathing her, sitting with her through the long, confused nights when she didn't know who anyone was. Mark had been too busy with work, he'd said. It was too hard for him to see her like that. I remembered those nights with painful clarity now. How Mark's mother would cry out for her son, and I'd be the one to comfort her, to lie and say he'd be there soon. How she'd sometimes look at me with brief moments of lucidity and whisper, "He's not a good man, dear. My son is not a good man. I'm sorry I raised him that way." I'd dismissed it as confusion, the disease talking. But maybe she'd been trying to warn me. When Jennifer had needed help with the kids after her second was born, I'd flown to Boston for 3 months, sleeping on their couch, taking care of my grandchildren while she recovered from a difficult delivery. Mark had visited once for a weekend, complaining the whole time about the cramped space and the noise. I'd sent money from my own savings to help with their down payment on a house, never asking for repayment, because that's what mothers do, isn't it? We give and never count the cost. Except someone had been counting. Someone had been keeping a very careful tally of everything we had, everything I had, and had been systematically taking it all away. I moved away from the window and went to my closet. In the back, behind the winter coats I rarely wore anymore, was a small lockbox. I'd kept it hidden there for years, a place for my most important documents. My birth certificate, my social security card, the title to the car that had been in my name. I pulled it out, my hands shaking, and tried the combination. It took 2 attempts, but it opened. Everything was still there, untouched. Mark probably didn't even know about this box. I pulled out the car title, held it in my hands like a lifeline. The car was mine. A 12-year-old Honda Civic that I'd bought, used with money from my mother's estate. Mark had wanted me to sell it. Said we didn't need 2 cars now that he was retired. But I'd insisted on keeping it, some stubborn part of me refusing to give up that last bit of independence. Thank God I'd held on to it. I changed out of my house dress, pulling on jeans and a sweater. My hands moved with purpose now, the fog in my head receding with each passing moment. How long since I'd had my morning coffee? 14 hours. 15? Long enough for whatever Mark had been giving me to start wearing off. Long enough for me to think clearly for the first time in months. I packed a small bag. A change of clothes, my medications, my toothbrush, the lockbox with my important documents. My wedding ring felt heavy on my finger, a weight I suddenly wanted to shed, but I left it there. I wasn't ready for that finality yet. I moved quietly, listening to the television downstairs, the laugh track of whatever sitcom Mark was watching. Before I left the bedroom, I did one more thing. I went to the bathroom and found the bottle of vitamins Mark had been putting in my coffee. It was in the medicine cabinet labeled Calcium Supplement, Margaret. I poured a handful into a small Ziploc bag and tucked it into my purse. Evidence. If I was right about what was happening, I'd need evidence. The stairs creaked on the 4th step from the bottom. They always had, for all 42 years we'd lived here. I'd learned to skip that step when I came down late at night, not wanting to wake Mark. But tonight, I didn't skip it. I let it creak. I wanted him to hear. He appeared in the doorway to the living room, his face shifting from surprise to concern when he saw me dressed, bag in hand. "Margaret, what are you doing? It's almost 9 o'clock. You should be resting." "I'm going out," I said, my voice stronger than I'd heard it in months. "Going out? Where?" He took a step toward me, his hand reaching out. "Honey, you're not well. You're confused. Let me help you back to bed." "Don't." I held up my hand, stopping him. "Don't touch me. Don't call me honey. Don't pretend you're helping me." His face changed then. The mask of concern slipped, just for a moment, and I saw something cold underneath, something calculating. "You're having an episode," he said, his voice taking on that patient, condescending tone I'd come to hate. "This is exactly what the doctor warned us about. The confusion, the paranoia. Let me call Dr. Patterson." "There is no Dr. Patterson," I said. "There never was there?" He was quiet for a long moment, studying me. I could see him deciding, weighing his options, trying to determine how much I knew, how lucid I really was. "Of course there's a Dr. Patterson," he said finally. "You've just forgotten. You forget a lot of things lately. I didn't forget that you stole $75,000 from our account today. I didn't forget the bank texted me, asking for authorization, which I never gave. I didn't forget that I haven't spoken to anyone at the bank in months." His jaw tightened. "The money is ours, Margaret. Our money. I moved it for better returns. I told you this. Show me the account. Show me where it went. I don't have to show you anything. You're my wife, not my accountant. And frankly, given your current mental state, I don't think you're capable of understanding complex financial matters anyway." There it was. The truth, finally spoken out loud. I wasn't a wife to him anymore. I was an obstacle, a problem to be managed, a source of funds to be depleted. I wondered how long he'd been planning this. Had it started when he retired, when he suddenly had too much time and not enough money to fund whatever lifestyle he'd imagined for himself? Or had it been longer, simmering under the surface of our marriage for years, waiting for the right opportunity? "I'm leaving," I said, moving toward the door. He moved faster than I expected, stepping in front of me, blocking my path. "You're not going anywhere. You're sick, Margaret. You need help. If you try to leave, I'll have to call for medical assistance, for your own safety. Get out of my way. I can't do that." His voice was firm now, all pretense of concern gone. "Sit down. We're going to wait for this episode to pass. And tomorrow we'll talk to your doctor about adjusting your medications." My medications. The vitamins that weren't vitamins at all. I felt anger rising in me, hot and clean, burning away the last of the fog. "What have you been giving me?" I demanded. "What's in those vitamins?" Something flickered in his eyes. Fear, maybe, or calculation. "You need to calm down. Your heart rate is elevated. You're working yourself into a state." "What's in them?" I asked again, louder this time. "Calcium, vitamin D, things that are good for you." "You're lying. You've been lying for months, making me think I was losing my mind, making Jennifer think I was deteriorating, isolating me so you could steal everything we'd built together. How much did you take? How much is left?" He didn't answer, but I saw the truth in his face. The cold acceptance that I'd figured it out, that the game was over. "You can't prove anything," he said quietly. "Even if you try to tell people, who's going to believe you? You're the one who's been having memory problems, who's been confused and disoriented. I have documentation. Months of notes about your declining mental state. Your own daughter thinks you're losing it." He was right, and we both knew it. I'd be the unreliable narrator of my own life, the confused old woman making accusations against her devoted husband. Unless I had proof, unless I could show someone what he'd been doing to me. "Let me leave," I said. "Just step aside and let me walk out that door, and maybe we can end this quietly. You keep whatever you've already taken, and I'll keep what's left. We'll separate, divorce, whatever you want, but you have to let me go." He studied me for a long moment, and I could see him thinking, calculating the risks. If he forced me to stay, if he called for medical help and I told them what I suspected, there would be questions, tests, investigations. But if he let me go, I'd just be another old woman running away from a marriage, confused and probably broke. "Fine," he said finally, stepping aside. "Go. Run to Jennifer. Tell her whatever crazy story you want. She'll just think it's more evidence of your deterioration. And when you come back, because you will come back, we'll get you the help you need." I didn't wait for him to change his mind. I grabbed my bag and walked past him, out the door, into the cold November night. My car was in the driveway, right where I'd left it 2 weeks ago, the last time I'd driven anywhere. Mark's car was blocking me in, but he'd left his keys on the hall table like he always did. I grabbed them on my way out. The Honda started on the first try, the engine turning over with a reassuring hum. I backed out carefully, my hands gripping the wheel so tight my knuckles went white. In the rearview mirror, I could see Mark standing in the doorway, backlit by the warm light from inside the house. Our house. The home we'd built together that I'd poured 42 years of my life into. I was leaving it all behind, but I was leaving with something more important. My clarity, my sanity, my life. I drove to the bank. First National was closed, of course, but there was an ATM in the vestibule that stayed open 24 hours. I pulled up to it, put the car in park, and sat there for a moment, my heart racing. The fog was creeping back in at the edges of my consciousness, or maybe it was just exhaustion, adrenaline wearing off. I needed to do this now, while I still could. I got out of the car and walked to the ATM. The night air was cold, biting through my sweater. My fingers fumbled with my wallet, pulling out my debit card. I slid it into the machine and entered my PIN. To my relief, it worked. Mark hadn't changed it yet. I checked my balance first. $15,237. Everything else was gone. 42 years of saving, of careful budgeting, of denying myself small luxuries so we could build a future together. Gone. I withdrew the maximum daily limit, $600, and tucked the cash into my bra. Then I turned to walk back to my car, and that's when it hit me. A wave of dizziness so intense the world tilted sideways. I reached for the wall, but my legs were giving out, my vision tunneling down to a pinpoint of light. The last thing I remember was the cold tile of the bank floor rushing up to meet me, and somewhere far away, the sound of sirens. I woke up in a hospital bed. The light was too bright, sterile, and white, and there was something beeping steadily nearby. An IV line snaked into my arm. My mouth was dry, and my head felt like it had been stuffed with cotton. For a moment, I didn't know where I was or how I'd gotten there. Then I heard his voice. "She's been having these episodes for months. I've been trying to get her to see a doctor, but she's so stubborn. This is exactly what I was afraid would happen." Mark, he was here, somewhere in the room, talking to someone, explaining away my collapse with more lies. I tried to sit up, but my body felt heavy, unresponsive. "Mrs. Foster?" A new voice, female, kind. "Can you hear me? You're in Northwestern Memorial Hospital. You collapsed at the bank. Don't try to move too quickly." I opened my eyes fully and saw a young nurse standing beside my bed, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, her eyes full of professional concern. Behind her, Mark stood with a doctor, a middle-aged man in a white coat with a stethoscope around his neck. "What happened?" I managed to ask, my voice cracking. "You had a severe hypotensive episode," the doctor said, stepping closer. "Your blood pressure dropped dangerously low, and you lost consciousness. We've been running some tests to determine the cause." He glanced at Mark, then back to me. "Your husband mentioned you've been taking some supplements. Can you tell me what medications you're currently on?" This was my chance. I was in a hospital, surrounded by medical professionals, people who would run tests and find the truth. "I don't know what they are," I said, forcing the words out clearly. "My husband's been putting something in my coffee every morning. He says they're vitamins, but they make me foggy, confused. I can't think straight after I drink it." The doctor's expression didn't change, but I saw something flicker in his eyes. Interest, maybe, or concern. "What kind of supplements, Mr. Foster?" Mark's face remained calm, that patient, concerned mask firmly in place. Just calcium and vitamin D, doctor, like I mentioned. She's been so forgetful lately. Sometimes she takes double doses without realizing it. I've tried to monitor her medication schedule, but she gets upset when I intervene. He turned to me, his voice soft and sad. Honey, you know that's not true. I would never give you anything that wasn't good for you. You're confused again. It's okay. That's why we're here, to get you help. No, I said, louder now. No, I'm not confused. Not anymore. It's been hours since I had any of whatever he's been giving me, and I can think clearly for the first time in months. He's been drugging me so he could steal our money. He's taken almost everything from our savings. $75,000 just today. Check my phone. The bank sent me a text about it. The doctor looked at Mark, then back at me. I could see him weighing our stories, trying to determine who was telling the truth. The devoted husband caring for his deteriorating wife, or the wife accusing her husband of poisoning her. It could go either way. My phone, I said again. Please, it should be with my things. There's a text from First National Bank about a large transfer. And in my purse, there's a Ziploc bag with some of the pills he's been giving me. Test them, please. Just test them, and you'll see I'm telling the truth. The nurse moved to the small closet where they'd stored my belongings. She found my purse, pulled out my phone, and handed it to the doctor. He unlocked it. The screen was still on. I'd never locked it after checking my bank balance, and scrolled through my messages. His expression shifted, became more serious. There is a text here from First National Bank, he said, looking at Mark, about a transfer of $75,000, requesting verbal authorization. Yes, I explained that to the bank when they called, Mark said smoothly. It was a planned transfer. Margaret gets confused about our financial arrangements. She thinks she handles all our money, but I've been managing our finances for months because of her condition. The bank can confirm I'm authorized on all our accounts. And yet the text was sent to Mrs. Foster's phone, not yours, the doctor observed. Mark's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. They have both our numbers on file. The nurse had found the Ziploc bag. She held it up, the white pills visible through the clear plastic. These aren't calcium supplements, she said, her voice uncertain. At least they don't look like any I've seen. They're unmarked. May I see those? The doctor asked. The nurse handed him the bag, and he studied the pills through the plastic, turning the bag over in his hands. We'll need to send these to the lab for analysis. This is ridiculous, Mark said, but there was an edge to his voice now, a crack in the smooth facade. My wife is clearly experiencing paranoid delusions. This is exactly what I've been trying to explain to her primary care physician. She needs psychiatric evaluation, not an investigation into her confused accusations. Who is her primary care physician? The doctor asked. There was a pause, just a beat too long. Dr. Patterson, Mark said. First name? Practice location? Another pause. I don't have that information with me. It's at home in our files. The doctor's expression had shifted now from neutral concern to something more alert, more interested. Mrs. Foster, do you remember ever seeing Dr. Patterson? I shook my head. There is no Dr. Patterson. That's what he tells people when they ask questions, but I've never seen any doctor. Not for months. Not since this all started. She's forgotten, Mark interjected. That's part of her condition. She forgets appointments, conversations, entire days sometimes. I'd like to run a full toxicology screen, the doctor said, and it wasn't a question. Standard procedure for unexplained syncope. We'll also analyze these pills. He held up the Ziploc bag. In the meantime, Mrs. Foster will be kept for observation. That's not necessary, Mark said. I can take care of her at home. This is all just a misunderstanding. I'm afraid I have to insist, the doctor said, his voice firm. Your wife collapsed in a public place with dangerously low blood pressure. Until we determine the cause, She needs to remain under medical supervision. I saw Mark's hands clench into fists at his sides, then deliberately relax. He was losing control of the situation, and he knew it. "Fine," he said. "I'll stay with her." "That won't be necessary," the doctor said. "Visiting hours are over. You can come back tomorrow morning." The look Mark gave me then was pure hatred, cold and sharp as a blade. All pretense was gone. He knew I'd figured it out, knew I'd found a way to tell someone who might actually listen. "I'll be back first thing in the morning," he said, his voice tight. "Don't worry, sweetheart. We'll get through this together." But I knew what he really meant. He'd be back to do damage control, to spin a story that made me look crazy and him look like the devoted spouse. I had until morning to make sure the truth came out. After he left, the room felt lighter, as if his presence had been pressing down on me like a physical weight. The doctor pulled up a chair beside my bed. "Mrs. Foster, I'm going to ask you some questions, and I need you to answer as honestly and completely as you can. Can you do that?" I nodded. "How long have you been taking these supplements your husband gives you?" I thought back, trying to piece together the timeline through the fog of lost time. "It started in June, I think. Maybe early July. Around the time he retired. He said his doctor friend recommended them for my bones." "And when did you start experiencing the symptoms? The confusion, the memory problems?" "Almost immediately, but it got worse gradually. By October, I was having episodes almost every day. I'd lose hours, sometimes whole afternoons. I couldn't remember simple things, couldn't concentrate." The doctor made notes on his tablet. "Did you ever see a doctor about these symptoms?" "Mark said he'd set up appointments, but I don't remember going to any. He'd tell me later that I'd been, that the doctor said it was normal aging, cognitive decline. I believed him because I couldn't remember well enough to dispute it." "And you said he's been handling your finances?" "For months now. He took over bit by bit, said I was making mistakes, writing checks wrong, forgetting to pay bills. I let him because I thought I couldn't trust myself anymore. But now I think he was setting it up, creating a paper trail that made me look incompetent so he could take control of everything." The doctor was quiet for a moment, studying me with those sharp, assessing eyes. "Mrs. Foster, what you're describing sounds like a pattern of financial elder abuse, possibly coupled with deliberate incapacitation. These are serious allegations." "I know," I said. "That's why I need you to test those pills. Whatever he's been giving me, it's not vitamins. And I need you to test my blood. If there's anything in my system, it should still show up, shouldn't it?" "Depending on the substance, yes. Some medications leave metabolites that can be detected for days or even weeks." He paused. "I'm going to be honest with you. If these tests come back showing you've been drugged, we'll need to involve the police. Are you prepared for that?" Was I? 42 years of marriage, ending not with a quiet separation, but with criminal charges and police reports and probably news coverage. Jennifer would find out. The grandkids would hear about it at school. Our neighbors would whisper. Everything we'd built together would be picked apart and examined under the harsh light of investigation. But the alternative was worse. The alternative was going back to that house, drinking that coffee, losing myself piece by piece until there was nothing left of Margaret Foster except a shell that Mark could puppet around while he drained every last cent we'd saved. "Yes," I said. "I'm prepared." The toxicology results came back 2 days later. I'd spent those days in the hospital, sleeping more soundly than I had in months, my mind growing clearer with each passing hour. No more morning coffee laced with whatever Mark had been using to keep me compliant and confused. The fog lifted, and what emerged underneath was anger. Pure, clean, righteous anger at what had been done to me, at what I'd almost lost. Benzodiazepines. That's what the pills had been. A long-acting sedative that built up in the system over time, causing exactly the symptoms I'd been experiencing. Confusion, memory problems, difficulty concentrating, dizziness, fatigue. The doctor explained that at the doses Mark had apparently been giving me, I was lucky I hadn't had a more serious medical emergency. The collapse at the bank had been my body finally reaching its limit. The police came on the third day. 2 detectives, a man and a woman, both in their 40s with patient professional demeanors. They sat beside my hospital bed and took my statement, recording every detail I could remember. The pattern of control, the isolation from Jennifer, the missing money, the unmarked pills, the fake doctor. They'd already talked to the bank. The $75,000 had been transferred to an account in Mark's name only, one he'd opened 6 months earlier. The bank had records of other transfers too, a steady drain of our savings over the summer and fall, all going into that same account. Total amount stolen, $82,400. Nearly all of our retirement savings, money I'd worked 15 years to help save, money we were supposed to use to travel, to help Jennifer with the kids' college funds, to live comfortably in our old age. We've obtained a warrant for his arrest, the female detective told me. Financial elder abuse, fraud, and based on the toxicology reports, assault with intent to incapacitate. That's a felony in Illinois. Mark was arrested at the house 4 hours later. Jennifer called me from Boston, her voice shaking with shock and disbelief. "Mom, what's happening?" "Dad called me crying, saying you've accused him of terrible things, that you're having some kind of breakdown. But the police just called me asking questions about your finances and your health. Mom, tell me what's going on." So I told her. Everything. The coffee, the fog, the missing money, the pills, the collapse. She cried as I talked, the sound of her sobbing carrying across the phone line like a physical thing. "I should have known," she said when I finished. "I should have visited. You sounded so strange on the phone those last few months, and I just believed him when he said you were okay, that you just needed rest." "Oh God, Mom, I'm so sorry." "It's not your fault," I told her, meaning it. "He's good at this. He's been lying to both of us for months, probably longer. He fooled me, and I was living with him. Of course he fooled you." She flew out the next day, took emergency leave from her job, and left the kids with her husband. I was still in the hospital when she arrived, and when she walked into my room and saw me, really saw me, thin and pale and exhausted, she burst into tears again. We held each other for a long time, her head on my shoulder the way it had been when she was a little girl and needed comforting. "We're going to fix this," she said fiercely. "We're going to get you healthy, and we're going to make sure he pays for what he did." The legal process was slow and brutal. Mark hired an expensive lawyer and fought every charge. He tried to claim I'd consented to the financial transfers, that I was confused about the medications, that this was all a tragic misunderstanding, blown out of proportion. His lawyer painted me as a woman in cognitive decline, unreliable and prone to paranoid fantasies. But the evidence was overwhelming. The toxicology reports showing dangerous levels of benzodiazepines in my system. The pills analyzed and found to contain the same medication, with no prescription on file anywhere for me. The bank records showing transfers I'd never authorized. The testimony of the bank teller who confirmed I'd never called to approve the $75,000 transfer, Mark had called, imitating my voice or claiming to call on my behalf. Most damning of all was Mark's own phone records. The investigators found texts between him and a woman named Linda, someone he'd met online. They'd been planning a future together, talking about traveling to Europe, buying a condo in Florida, all with my money. The texts went back to May, a month before the vitamins had started appearing in my coffee. He'd been planning this for months, maybe longer. The retirement had given him time to arrange everything, to research what drugs would work, to slowly isolate me from anyone who might notice what was happening. If I hadn't gotten that text from the bank, if I hadn't been clear-headed enough in that one crucial moment to question what was happening, he might have succeeded. The trial took 8 months. In the end, Mark was convicted on all charges. The judge sentenced him to 12 years in prison. Financial elder abuse, fraud, assault, forgery for the false bank authorizations. 12 years. It should have felt like justice. It should have felt like closure. But mostly, it just felt sad. 42 years of my life, tied to a man who'd been willing to destroy me for money, who'd seen me not as a partner, but as an obstacle, a resource to be exploited and then discarded. I'm 70 now. It's been 3 years since that night I drove to the bank, since I collapsed on that cold tile floor and woke up in a hospital bed that probably saved my life. I live in a small apartment on the north side of Chicago now, near Jennifer and her family. The apartment is cozy, filled with plants and photos of my grandchildren. My hands still tremble sometimes, but it's just age now, nothing more sinister. The money Mark stole was partially recovered through the criminal restitution process. Not all of it. He'd already spent some on his plans with Linda, who disappeared as soon as the investigation started. But enough that I'm not destitute. Enough to live on, carefully, supplemented by my Social Security. I see Jennifer and the grandkids every week. We bake cookies at Christmas, just like we used to, and my kitchen smells of cinnamon and pine. I make my own coffee now, plain and simple, and I drink it slowly, savoring every clear-headed moment. Sometimes I think about Mark, in his prison cell, serving his 12-year sentence. I wonder if he ever thinks about what he threw away, what we could have had if he'd been content with what we'd built together. But mostly, I try not to think about him at all. I survived. That's what matters. I found my voice when it mattered most, fought for my own sanity, my own reality, when someone I trusted was trying to erase both. I'm here, and I'm myself again, and every morning when I wake up clear-headed and certain of who I am, that feels like the greatest victory of all. If you're watching this and something about my story resonates with you, if you see pieces of your own life in what I've described, please listen to that instinct. Trust yourself. If someone is telling you you're losing your mind, if they're isolating you from family and friends, if they're taking control of your finances and your medications and your very sense of reality, please reach out for help. Call a family member, call a doctor, call the police if you have to, but don't let them convince you that your own perception is wrong, that you can't trust yourself. Sometimes the people we love most are capable of hurting us in ways we never imagined possible. I learned that the hard way, but I also learned that it's never too late to save yourself, to fight back, to reclaim your life. Even at 67, foggy and frightened and unsure, I found the strength to walk out that door, to get help, to tell the truth even when I knew no one might believe me. You can too. Whatever you're going through, whatever private hell someone has constructed around you, there's a way out. There's always a way out. You just have to be brave enough to take it. Thank you for listening to my story. If it helped you, if it gave you courage or clarity or hope, please share it. These stories need to be told. These warnings need to be heard. And maybe, just maybe, sharing what happened to me will help save someone else from the same fate. I'm Margaret Foster. I'm a survivor. And I'm here to tell you that it's never too late to save yourself.